Somebody who's listening and learning and helping teachers all over the United States is my friend Allison Riddle from Utah. She is going to be joining us on stage. She is a Utah native. Allison grew up running, hiking, and skiing along the beautiful Wasatch Mountains. Although she has faced incredible terrain and ominous storms, her most challenging and satisfying journeys have occurred for all of us in the classroom. She says our most difficult days teaching can lead to a personal best for both us and our students. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Allison Riddle.
It's here, the clicker is here. My dad and I share an insane joy of running. The best advice he ever gave me had to do with the hardest runs. He said, when a run feels the most challenging, I am probably making the most progress. After an especially difficult run, he said, notice how much stronger you feel on the next run. Your discomfort is gone. Your speed is back. And you're ready to take on whatever the road offers you. Working with Defiant students can be a difficult run. Not every day is hard, but some can be incredibly rough. I struggle to remain consistent, calm, and confident when a student escalates that defiant behavior and tests me in front of the class. By the end of the day, I'm worn out and discouraged, but the following days somehow run smoother. Maybe it's because the student has figured out that I will follow through. Or perhaps I carry myself with greater confidence, having made it through the struggle. By mid-year, my runs with a student, they often diminish. And I notice that we're beginning to build a trusting relationship. You know, in the strangest way, my most challenging students become my favorites. Perhaps not right at the moments where they're pushing back, but over time, I have realized that my hardest students have made me a stronger, more effective teacher. Now, a few years ago, I had that student, one who tested me and made me much better. Fifth graders, generally excited to begin school, they start the year with wide, curious eyes and this yearning to learn something new. But this young lady, who I will call Stephanie, she walked in on the first day carrying some very heavy baggage and a serious attitude problem. Stephanie seemed determined to shock her 10-year-old classmates with her sense of fashion, her love of alternative music, and often with her choice of language. Stephanie struggled to work in pairs and cooperative groups, and it was obvious she had had some very disappointing relationships in her life with both kids and adults. And Stephanie was especially resistant to believe that I wanted her to succeed. One beautiful fall morning, I went outside the school to line my kids up, bring them in for a good, strong day. And as I was standing in front of my line, one of my colleagues came and whispered in my ear, "Have you seen her yet?" So I looked down the line, and there, amidst the smiling faces, was Stephanie, who had come that morning not just wearing a frown, but with a frown covered in black lipstick. Now I know, black lipstick, that's no big deal. But in an elementary classroom, in a sleepy little suburb, black lipstick was sure to cause a disruption. I remember thinking, what do I do? I wanted Stephanie to know that I accepted her for who she was, but at the same time, I knew I had to protect the learning time for all my students. So, as the students came walking up the line, I motioned for Stephanie to come stand beside me, and you can imagine she slid up next to me and rolled her eyes and flipped her head back. And I said, "Good morning, Stephanie. Hey, listen, it's just fine, as long as it doesn't interrupt my instruction or the learning of others." Stephanie was confused at first. She looked at me and she said, "Huh?" I said, "Stephanie, the lipstick, it's just fine, as long as it doesn't interrupt my teaching or the learning of anyone else in the class." A smile slowly crept up on her face, and she said, "Okay." We went in behind the rest of the students, in through the school hallway, and I remember that same colleague coming up to me and whispering in my ear, "Oh, you're going to regret this." But as I walked in, I watched my students begin their morning routine, and as I looked over to Stephanie's table, one of the boys that sat at her table was pointing at her face. And he said, "Stephanie, what is that?" And she calmly replied to him, "We can't talk about it right now. It's time to learn." She wore that lipstick for weeks, and no one said another word to her again. I remember thinking, I am so successful. I am the best teacher. Although, to be honest, Stephanie and I, we had so many short, hard runs the rest of that year. In fact, at times I felt as if I were handing her consequences like they were Skittles. But by mid-year, I noticed that Stephanie, she began participating in discussions appropriately. And by the spring, there was a softness in her eyes that I had not seen in the fall. Still, I was so surprised when, on the last day of school, Stephanie came bouncing into my room and she announced, "Mrs. Riddle, my mom said I didn't have to come to school today because you're done with report cards. But I told her I wanted to be here because you like me." I was so used to the kids always telling me how much they liked me, right? But this young lady, this challenging young lady, she came on the last day of school because she knew that I liked her. There are dozens of books and theories written about working with students who are behaviorally challenging, and while I appreciate many of their methods, I am convinced that in the end, it is more about the efforts that we make to build a trusting relationship, even or especially when it is difficult. Every day I showed Stephanie that I accepted her, while at the same time expressing that she must follow the expectations in our class. You know, my dad might say that Stephanie and I, we made it through that marathon year by focusing on those hard, short runs. Like many of you, I have learned a lot on those hard, short runs, and I've kind of gathered a few training tips over the years. I'd like to share them with you. First, be consistent. Students who are emotionally fragile benefit greatly from knowing that the teacher will respond consistently, not just to him or her, but to every student in that class. Second, give space to students who are emotionally escalated. You know, teachers are funny. We're time conscious. We want to solve problems quickly in that limited amount of time that we have with those kids. But when an adult tries to force an escalated child to comply, the situation usually worsens. allowing that student ample time to breathe and calm down will ultimately result in greater gains, even if those gains are the following day. Third, model respect. While a punitive consequence may seem like a logical move to most educators after a long day, it often sends the message that those with the most power can have their way. Harsh punishments rarely expose the causes of misbehavior, nor do they automatically lead a student into making better choices. By speaking to a student in a low, respectful tone and offering reasonable consequences that are directly related to that misbehavior, a teacher can begin to build trust with that student, allowing the student to maintain dignity in front of classmates, and hopefully encouraging that student to really reflect on the choices that were made. And finally, and perhaps to me most importantly, express your hope for the child. Deep down, every teacher wants each one of his or her students to be successful, both academically and socially, and expressing that hope to both the student and the parents kind of brings everybody in on the same team, and it allows for a much smoother baton pass during those really difficult runs. Students with emotional and behavioral challenges desperately want teachers to be the adults in their lives who help them make it to the next mile marker. Let's do this. Can you imagine if these kids walked in at the first day of school or every day to a teacher who was dedicated to building trust? Can you imagine the time that would be saved and the progress that these kids would make? As educators, let's spread this idea that often those hardest runs are the most meaningful part of the journey. Let's lace up our shoes and build the stamina needed during those marathon years to end with a personal best for both teacher and student. Let's show them with our behaviors. I like you. I believe in your abilities. And I am so glad that you came to school today. Thank you.